The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com. Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Steve Kozelet, president of the MassINC Polling Group, and it's Thursday, August 21st. Last week, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation released the People and Transportation Project Report, which showed in great detail the burden that transportation places on some of the lowest income residents of the Commonwealth. The report also adds to the growing body of data questioning who benefits from all the great things about living here in Massachusetts. Today, we're going to discuss this new poll and what it shows about the state of Massachusetts. For this, I'm joined by my friend, colleague, and vice president of the MassINC Polling Group, Rich Parr. Rich, thanks for joining again.
Thank you for having me again.
So you're the right guest for this because as longtime listeners or even short-time listeners of The Horse Race know, you live in Northampton.
That's right. Yeah. So this new project that we're going to talk about today is in my backyard in Western Massachusetts. And I'm really excited that we got to work on this for MassDOT. It's, I feel like, an underserved population and an underserved region of the state.
Yes, and certainly worth noting the lots and lots of hard work that went into this report. But I want to start off talking about the general topic of the costs and benefits of living in Massachusetts these days. Who's it good for? Who is it maybe less good for? And I want to start with a headline this week that I think caught all of our eye, which was that once again, Massachusetts was ranked the best state to live. We, of course, love hearing that about ourselves, how great we are and so forth. But let's dig into that a little bit. So Rich, tell us about the study itself.
Yeah, so this was conducted by Wallet Hub, one of those financial advice websites. But they did a ranking of the states, and Massachusetts came in number one as a place to live. But what's interesting about that is that it came in that high despite being one of the lowest ranked states in terms of affordability. So the things that we're really good at are education and healthcare, quality of life, safety. Our economy is in the top 10, but our affordability is in the lower end of the rankings, 44 out of the 50 states. So despite that, all those other positives for us are putting us at the top of the list.
Right. This is one of those studies that many organizations put out where you basically create your own factors that then roll up into whatever it is you're trying to rank. And affordability was not one where we did particularly well, though we still love hearing how great we are. So even Governor Maura Healey noted it in a post that she did on Instagram saying Massachusetts was just ranked the best state to live in again, and then listed off all the great things about living in Massachusetts. But this idea of affordability being kind of an outlier where we have lots of great things about living in Massachusetts, but maybe they're not so great for everybody is not really a new topic for us, Rich, right? Like this is something we see a lot in our surveys.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, just to take an example, we did a survey for Commonwealth Beacon, our sister publication, back in October of 2023, where we were looking at various factors. How are we doing compared to other states, sort of ranking Massachusetts against other states on things like education, healthcare, costs, transportation, etc. And what you see when you look at the data is that folks who have a higher level of education, who have a higher level of income, are much more likely to give the state higher rankings on a lot of these things. And if you're on the lower end of the education scale and the lower end of the income spectrum, particularly people who make less than $50,000 in their household in a year, we're seeing lower rankings for these things. So it's raising the question of not only can folks who are on the lower end afford to live here, but are they getting the same... Are they having the same kind of experience of the good stuff as well? So, for example, to take higher education, which was at the top of this list, I think the general perception is Massachusetts has some of the best universities in the country. So if you've got a BA or higher, 80% of those people are saying we're doing much or a little bit better than everybody else on that. But if you do not have one of those degrees, if you're lower than that, only 53% of people said that. And that same pattern extends to income. If you're on the lower end of the income scale, 54% of people said higher education, we're doing great. 78% among the people who are making more money, making over $100,000 in their household income. So that pattern extends down the table as you go, if you will, looking at all these different issues from the things that we're considered to be best at down into the stuff that we're doing worst at. And the stuff that we're doing worst at in that survey are overall cost of living and housing costs. Everybody agrees that those are the big problems. So it's not just that overall everyone is saying cost is bad, and then when you look at the people who are most impacted by costs, they also have a different colored view of the entire picture.
Yes, and I think it's worth digging in on that a little bit, because one way to read it would be that you just would not necessarily have access to the world-leading institutions in healthcare or higher education, for example, if you just can't afford to participate in them. Or arts and culture, another one where we, ranked quite highly and showed that same pattern. If you can't, afford tickets to the symphony or to go to the museums or all the other things that we have going, then, what good does it do that Massachusetts has all of these things if you yourself can't participate? K-12 education is another one where often, of course, the type of education or the quality of education you get can be determined by the municipality where you live and, how many property taxes they collect and so forth. So certainly a dynamic that I think shows up over and over again. And it's into this context that the poll that we're talking about today really falls. So we're going to explain what that means here in a second. But Rich, tell us about the report itself. What were we actually doing? What did MassDOT release?
Yeah, so as you mentioned at the beginning, this was called the People and Transportation Project. That's what MassDOT framed this as when we, started working with them on the project. The goal was to hire a research firm like us to work with a community organization to really dig in and understand kind of the challenges that group, that the population that organization is serving is having with transportation, with getting around their part of the state. So we selected Wayfinders as our community partner to work on this project. And Wayfinders is a community development corporation. They're based in Springfield, Massachusetts. And what do community development corporations do? Well, they own housing. They actually build and own and operate some rental housing units throughout Western Massachusetts. They also administer a voucher program, so people who need a housing voucher to be able to afford where they live. They do some other economic stability programs. They run first-time homebuyers programs to get people into their first homes. They actually operate homeless shelters as well. So they do a whole host of services serving a very needy population in Hampden and Hampshire counties in Massachusetts. So Hampden County is where Springfield is. Hampshire County is where I live, where Northampton and Amherst are just above that on the map. So that's the geography and the population that we're talking about here.
So what to take from that, I think, is that this report was really digging into a population that we don't really hear from in a lot of detail in surveys just because of the way that they're done. It ends up being a pretty narrow slice of the overall population, but one that is very important to understand from a research perspective and a transportation perspective. So with all of that as a wind-up, Rich, give us some of the highlights of what the research actually found. Yeah,
and this was a survey of 1,600 clients of Wayfinders, 8 focus groups, 4 before the survey to help us write it, 4 after to help understand the findings. We also did an additional 600 person representative survey of lower income folks in these 2 counties to see how does this group compare to that larger group. And the answer is there's a lot of differences in terms of demographics and differences in terms of their responses to the survey. But I think one thing that came through on both surveys was that cost, as we were just talking about, is a big factor in the way that people get around. So we asked folks how much of a burden the amount that they spend on transportation and, car payments, gas and maintenance for their car, taking the bus, taking an Uber or Lyft or a taxi, how much is that a burden for them? And among the Wayfinders people, overwhelming, like 80% of people said that was at least somewhat of a burden for them. 49% said it was a very big burden. In the regional survey, the broader survey that we did as a companion to this, it was a little bit lower. There you had just over half of people saying that it was somewhat of a burden. But in both groups, you're seeing a really substantial portion of people in the Wayfinders group, an overwhelming, I would say, proportion of people saying that just the cost of getting around is a big problem for them.
Owning a car can be quite a significant financial burden, as this survey found. And one of the things that led to is that a lot of the people we surveyed don't own cars at all. So, Rich, give us the numbers there.
Yeah, I would say, Western Massachusetts is pretty rural when you get out of the cities. And so most of the people in this survey, in both surveys, are driving. And most of them do own a car, but there is a difference in the extent to which Wayfinder's clients are able to own cars. So 2/3 of Wayfinder's clients in this survey own a car. 31% said that they did not. Among the people who owned a car, only 19% of the Wayfinder's folks said that they could afford to fix it if it broke down. And that's really crucial because the Wayfinder's folks in the survey were much more likely to say they only owned a single car in their entire household as opposed to multiple cars. So if you're relying on a single car and you can't afford to fix that car, that's going to create some challenges for you in terms of your mobility. Among the people who did not own a car, the Wayfinder's folks who did not own a car, only 27% of Wayfinder's folks who did not own a car said that they would be able to borrow one or get a ride from somebody else in their community if they needed to. So again, people who don't have a car are kind of stuck without one. People who do have a car are in a very precarious position where they have more likely to have a single car and more likely to not be able to afford to fix that if it were to come up.
Yes, I like the word precarious because I think that really vividly describes the situation that a lot of the people we talked to throughout this research process were in. I want to turn to some of the practical impacts of this because you've described the situation just in terms of who owns what and what they could do financially. But what does that actually mean in terms of everyday life?
Yes, so we asked folks in both of these surveys about kind of just typical things that could happen to them as relates to transportation. And what we found is that significant percentages of the Wayfinders clients were telling us that they have had one of these things happen to them. 54% of Wayfinders clients said that they've been late for or missed an appointment. That's the one that really stands out. A majority of folks saying that. 37% have been late getting home after work or going for errands. 36% have been late to work or to school. 31% have had to skip medical care because of a problem with transportation. 25% have been stranded somewhere, and 24% have been late getting a child from school or daycare. So these are really significant everyday and economic impacts for people. The Wayfinders clients much more likely to be reporting this than the broader population, but still, I think it's really important to understand that these are some of the folks who are kind of in the neediest position. They're telling us they're having trouble affording to get around, that their transportation situation is precarious, and it's really having some significant everyday impacts on their lives.
Yes, Rich, you and I are both parents and can attest to the challenge of, the bell has rung, you need to get to school, you need to pick the child up after daycare, and all the consequences of not doing that, pile up pretty fast. So this is not only just something about being places on time. The consequences in that context are being late for work, losing jobs, et cetera, are really quite significant. So I found this chart very striking just in terms of the picture that it paints of the challenges of everyday life that can be created when the transportation you try to rely on is less than fully reliable.
Yes, and I should say regarding these charts, you can download this full report now. It's up on the MassDOT website. We've posted it on our social media as well. So you can go and actually see all of these numbers in full display. And really get a full understanding of all of the work that we did on this project. It was really a big undertaking, and we're really excited to be able to share it with everybody.
One of the other challenges that we dug into and that exists in the area that we were discussing, of course, is transit. And people from Boston may not kind of know, and people from elsewhere in Massachusetts may not be familiar with kind of what exists in terms of transit. So, Rich, what is the situation in terms of what people have access to? And then how did the people who participated in this research describe their interaction with the transit system?
Yeah, I think that Western Massachusetts, as I mentioned, is pretty rural and pretty far-flung. We do have the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority runs buses in Springfield and then connecting all the way up into Hampshire County as well. So you can take a bus from Northampton down to Springfield if you wanted to, or to the Holyoke Mall. These do exist, but they're not. It does not run as frequently, or as conveniently, I would say, as say the MBTA service. What we found in the survey is that partially because Wayfinder's clients are less likely to have that reliable car access. Maybe they're sharing a car with one person in their household. They're much more likely to report using some other modes of transit in addition to driving. Driving is still the top mode amongst the Wayfinder's clients, but they're much more likely than the regional sample to use a ride-hailing app, Uber or Lyft. They're much more likely to use the PVTA than the population as a whole. And as a result, we heard some complaints about both of those things. One of the really interesting things that I'll remember from the focus groups that we did before we did the survey was people talking about, they actually called it Hood Uber, which is essentially a Facebook website where they went to, you can essentially join this group on Facebook and ask people for rides, or people offer rides. And it's essentially a kind of a crowdsourced ad hoc type of ride sharing program that a lot of people were saying was much more affordable than the Uber and Lyft services that are available out here in the Valley. But also that it was extremely risky, that, you might call for a ride and they might take your money and not take you where you want to go, or you might be harassed by the driver. So there was all this whole host of issues. It was one of those moments in a focus group where you hear about something that you'd never heard of before that was common knowledge among the people who were in the room, but was like opening up a door to this whole other way of mobility that we hadn't really been discussing with people. And I think it's interesting that is something that people have turned to out here, because I think it's an indication that the transit system is maybe not serving the needs necessarily, and that Uber and Lyft, to the extent that they're out here, are much more expensive. A lot of people complained that, maybe their Uber ride was $10 one way, but when they have to go back during rush hour, it goes up to $30, and they just can't afford that, and it becomes extremely expensive for them. So cost, again, rearing its head in terms of the ride-hailing services. Cost is not so much of an issue with public transit. In fact, the PVTA buses have been free out here now for a while. But there we heard people more, wishing that they came more often, or that the routes were, didn't take so long to get somewhere, that it was more express stuff and things like that. Those are the sorts of complaints that we heard about the transit system. But it's so you see cost coming up with the ride-hailing stuff, which is being kind of seen as a substitute for driving when you need it. And then kind of below that, you see the people who are kind of complaining about the convenience or the frequency or the travel times on the PVTA system.
Let's stick then with this idea of cost just in terms of time. Rich, we also then looked at just how long it takes to get places, particularly to and from work, if you're using various modes of transportation. So what did we find there?
Yeah, so we looked at how long it takes people to commute to work in this survey. And what we found was that there are some pretty significant differences based on how you get there. What is your main mode of travel? So folks who are driving or maybe taking an Uber or Lyft are reporting, much shorter commute times than folks who take the PVTA. And for folks who are taking the PVTA, a majority of the folks using that mode are saying that their commute takes more than half an hour, and 24%, a quarter of them, are saying that it takes 60 minutes or more to get around. That is much, much higher than the shares among the folks who are driving themselves. There's really not a lot of traffic out here in Western Massachusetts, I can attest to. There's a little bit in the mornings, but for the most part, it's the distances that people have to travel that account for most of their travel. But with the PVTA, you're traveling some distances on the bus. You're waiting for the bus. You might be waiting for a transfer to get to where you're going. The other thing that's interesting to note is that Wayfinder's clients were much more likely to report that they work irregular hours, that they work early shifts, that they work late shifts or overnight shifts. And those folks are also more likely to say that they relied on the PVTA to get around. So it's finding some way to increase the amount of service at those odd times could help those folks who are working those odd shift hours to get to their jobs a little bit more efficiently than they are able to do right now.
And we should just note, of course, that for those not from the area, that for people working those odd shifts and odd hours, as the night gets later, and particularly on weekends, service definitely becomes less frequent.
Yes, it does. And I think the PVTA will say that they've been making some improvements in that regard, and also in terms of the weekend service. But it is definitely a different level of service than you would expect if you were in the Boston area, waiting for a bus on the T. It's just not the same kind of level of service, and I think that's why you're seeing alternatives spring up, kind of that are trying to fill this ground between the public transit and the ride-hailing. The folks are reporting that they're relying on.
So we've talked about cost in a few different ways. We've talked about financial cost of owning a car. We've talked about cost in time, even cost in your own perceived physical safety. But we also looked at one specific element of cost, which is just, should the bus be free? Which is something that we've talked about all across the state in different contexts. So what did the research project find in that regard?
Yeah, and I should note that, during the time that we were doing all of this research, this was the period when free buses were sort of being extended to all of the RTAs, and I think that we were in a pilot program for it at the time. But we found that this was a popular idea, not only among the Wayfinders clients, but also folks in the regional survey, even folks that didn't necessarily take the bus. And we've seen this in other regions. We've done a lot of research about free RTA service in the Worcester area, the South Coast area. What we typically find is that people who don't even take the bus like the idea of it being free because they perceive the bus service in their region as serving folks who don't have any alternatives to get around, and they see it as really something that is helpful for folks who might not be able to afford even a bus fare. So this was we found a majority support for making the buses free, among both sets of folks in the survey, the regional residents, lower income residents as a whole, and then also the Wayfinders clients in particular. Where we did see a difference was that in terms of who would be likely to ride the bus more if it were free. And there we saw that Wayfinders clients were much more likely to say that they would actually, consider riding the bus more if it were free compared to folks in the regional survey. Those folks were a little less likely to ride the bus to start with, and less willing to consider it as an option. Among the Wayfinders clients, there are about a quarter of them who were already bus riders. Those folks in particular, current bus riders, were saying, yeah, if it were free, I would definitely make more use of the service than I do right now. So it would increase ridership, it seems, mostly among people who are kind of already familiar with the service. I think one of the challenges that we saw in the focus groups and in some of the open-ended responses, that a lot of people are not familiar with the service. They're not familiar with where to get on a bus, the transfers, the routes, which bus would take them where they need to go. And one of the things that came up in the last set of focus groups, we asked people, what are the sorts of things that you'd like to see Wayfinders do to help support the community in terms of transportation? And one of the things that was suggested was, well, why don't you have a class about how do you take the PVTA? Well, how about just teach people how to use the resources that are available to them, because it seems like a lot of people aren't aware that they have this bus service that would be able to get them to places that they might be paying for an Uber or Lyft right now. They might not realize that there might be another way to get there. So public awareness is a big part of this as well.
Okay, well, if you want to read the report in full, it's posted on our website at massincpolling.com. For now, Rich Parr, Vice President of the MassINC Polling Group, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet.
We'll be right back.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the MassINC Polling Group. The MassINC Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massincpolling.com.
And that brings us to our final segment, which this week comes to us from our burgeoning Roblox department here at the horse race. Rich, there's a story in the Boston Globe about a MBTA bus simulator, but this is not one of those big ones that you can ride around on at trade shows and so forth. This is one actually that exists in a game, which it sounds like your kids and my kids both play obsessively.
Yes, that's right. So apparently some big young fans of the MBTA have gotten into Roblox, which is this video game platform where you can play games that other people have created and create your own games. They've decided to recreate some MBTA routes within Roblox and then let people be on them. I'm not sure if it's driving them, riding them, both. It sounds a lot more wholesome than a lot of the other content that I've seen on Roblox through my limited experience with my children's interactions with this platform. But it's, hey, what a world,
Yeah, it sounds like you actually are the driver, which is sort of fun. I guess maybe the MBTA can find some drivers on Roblox. I don't know.
That's right. This is a stealth recruiting program for the future of the MBTA.
It's a good idea, actually. I have in-game advertisements or something like that. Anyhow, for now, that is all the time we have for this week. I'm Steve Cazella, signing off with Rich Parr. Our producer, as always, is Charlie Cazella. You can write to us at thehorseracepodcast@gmail.com if you have a Roblox mod you'd like us to review. Don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to Commonwealth Beacon's daily download and reach out to us here at the MassINC Polling Group if you need polls or focus groups done. For now, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.